He thought the land had taken everything. But when 4 boys sank into death right before his eyes, something deeper rose in him. Not blood, not duty, something greater. Something like fatherhood. The scream cut through the canyon like a whip crack, sharp, wild, and full of the kind of panic that turns a man's bones to ice. Everett Boone yanked the reins before the echo had even finished bouncing off the stone walls, his mare rearing as dust churned around her hooves. Another scream followed, smaller this time, weaker, and the sound of splashing. No, not splashing, sucking. Everett knew that sound. Quicksand. He didn't think. He just moved. The canyon path narrowed to a choke point where the rain-swollen wash had eaten away the ground, leaving patches of deceptive sand between tufts of dry grass and thorn brush. The sun glared down off the rocks, and there, 20 yards out in the middle of the shifting earth, were 4 boys. One was up to his chest, arms flailing. Another screamed while holding onto the smallest, who was almost completely submerged except for a patch of blonde hair, slicked to his scalp. The 4th boy knelt on a rock, trying to pull one of the others free, but he was losing his grip fast. "Help! Please!" the kneeling one cried out, spotting Everett as the man leapt from his horse. "There, he's sinking. He's gonna die." Everett didn't answer. Words wouldn't help here. He moved with precision, his boots crunching over safe ground as he skirted the sand's edge, uncoiling the rope from his saddle horn in one practice motion. He scanned the mess. No time to anchor it. No time to circle back for tools. Just one shot. "Hold on to each other," he barked, his voice hard and cutting through the panic like a blade. The boy on the rock did as told, wrapping his arms around the nearest sinking body. Everett took 3 steps forward, felt the give of the earth under one boot, and stopped cold. Too close. He dropped to one knee, lashed the rope into a loop, and hurled it with every ounce of strength in his shoulders. It landed, barely, over the arms of the one clutching the others. The boy's grip shook, but he held on. Everett planted his heels, leaned back, and pulled. The sand fought like a living thing. It sucked at them with greedy fingers, refusing to let go. But Everett had been born on this land, had fought for every inch of it, and he wasn't about to let it take these boys. He grunted, pulled harder, step by brutal step, until with a final lurch and a shower of wet grit, the 4 boys tumbled on a solid ground like fish flung from a net. All of them heaving, all of them covered in mud, all of them alive. Everett collapsed to one knee, catching his breath, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Not since before the war. Not since before. Well, before everything. The oldest boy was maybe 9, his face pinched and pale, a gash on his temple where he'd scraped the rock. He looked at Everett with something raw in his eyes, fear, gratitude, confusion. The smallest boy coughed weakly, mud smeared across his cheeks like war paint. The other 2 clung to each other, shaking. "Where's your folks?" Everett asked, still winded. The boys looked at each other. No one spoke. "I said, where's your family?" he pressed. "They ain't comin'," the oldest said finally, voice flat. "Ain't nobody comin'. We're it." Everett's stomach sank. "Been walking 2 days," the boy went on. "No water since yesterday. Tried to cut through the canyon to find a road. We didn't know about the sand." His voice cracked on the last word. Everett stood. The sun was already climbing high, heat pressing down like a weight. He looked at the boys, 4 of them huddled together, soaked and trembling. "You're coming with me," he said, turning toward his mare. The oldest didn't move. "You ain't gonna sell us, are you?" His voice was too calm, too rehearsed. Everett froze. Something twisted in his chest. He looked back. "No," he said after a long moment. "Ain't nobody buying what they should be protecting." The ride back to the ranch was slow, the mare loaded down with supplies, and one of the boys in the saddle with Everett, the rest walking alongside. He didn't ask their names yet. Didn't offer his. That would come later. For now, they needed water, food, and shade. And they needed to stop shaking. Boone Ranch wasn't much. Just 2 barns, a lopsided windmill, and a house that leaned slightly west from years of hard sun and harder winters. The fields were half dust, half stubborn green, and the cattle were down to 2 dozen head. Everett hadn't had hands on the place in 5 years. Not since his wife left, and the doc told him the truth. that he'd never father children of his own. He hadn't spoken that out loud to his soul. Hadn't needed to. The land had a way of answering silence with more silence. The boys stood awkwardly as Everett helped them down and led them toward the pump. Wash off best you can. Don't drink it. Just clean up, he instructed, setting a bucket under the spout and pumping until clear water splashed in. They obeyed without a word. He watched as they scrubbed grime from their faces and rinsed the quicksand from their arms. When they were done, he handed each one a tin cup and pointed to the barrel near the porch. That's drinking water. Go slow. Inside, the house was cool and dim. The windows shuttered against the worst of the heat. Everett laid out blankets on the floor and pulled jerky from a tin, along with the last of the summer apples he'd stored. The boys sat where he told them, eating without complaint, though the smallest, barely 6 if Everett had to guess, couldn't stop glancing around the room like it might vanish if he blinked. Afterward, they slept. All of them, piled on the floor like pups, their limbs tangled and breath soft. Everett sat in his chair near the stove, watching. Something in him itched, something old and long buried. He rubbed his hand over his mouth, exhaled through his nose, and didn't move for hours. When they woke, he asked their names. Lucas, the oldest said, touching the gash on his forehead. Finn, said the red-haired one with freckles and a swollen knee. Wes, muttered the boy with quiet eyes who'd been holding the youngest. And him. Everett nodded toward the last boy, who hadn't spoken a word yet. Ben, Lucas answered. He don't talk much since Mama. Everett didn't ask. He didn't need to. He taught them to feed the chickens. Showed them how to check the fences. He gave Wes a bandage for a twisted ankle and let Ben hold the saddle brush while he worked on the mare. At night, he gave them space. Didn't ask questions. Just let the silence stretch between them like the plains, wide and steady and waiting. But the silence didn't stay empty. Lucas started asking about the cattle. Finn wanted to know what the windmill did. Wes followed Everett like a shadow, never speaking unless spoken to. And Ben started leaving small things on the porch each morning. A feather, a flat rock, a stick shaped like a Y. Gifts, Everett realized. The kind a boy gives when he's not sure how else to say what's in his heart. 3 days passed like that, and then came the 4th. Everett was in the barn, stacking feed sacks, when he heard the voice behind him. Papa. He turned, slow. It was Ben, the little one, standing in the doorway with a wooden horse in one hand and mud on his shirt. His eyes were wide and unsure. Everett didn't speak. Couldn't. Something in his chest cracked open, raw and sudden. The boy stepped forward. I know you ain't really, he said, but it feels like maybe you could be. Someday. Everett dropped the sack. Knees buckled a little. And in that dim, dusty barn, for the first time in over a decade, he felt something new. Not joy. Not yet. But the start of it. The word echoed through Everett Boone long after the boy had padded away across the dust-packed yard. Papa. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even quite a question. Just a fragile offering, whispered like a secret in a world that never kept them. Everett didn't answer. Couldn't. Not then. He remained in the barn long after the light slanted low and the sounds of boys faded into the hush of evening, his hands idle, his thoughts turning like wagon wheels stuck in mud. When he finally stepped outside, the land had taken on that deep amber hue it wore before surrendering to night. The wind was soft for once, only a whisper through the dry grass. He spotted the boys on the porch, curled together under an old quilt, watching the last of the sun disappear behind the hills. He didn't speak, just sat in the rocker near them, boots creaking softly on the planks, his eyes never leaving the horizon. And still, that word burned behind his ribs. A word he'd buried years ago. He thought of Alice. Of the letter she'd left on the table with her wedding ring folded inside. Of the doctor's quiet voice that had told them the truth with more kindness than Everett had deserved. Infertile. Barren. Useless. He'd spent months after that shoving the words down into the dirt, pretending the land was enough. The cattle, the barn, the ache in his spine after a long day. Those had become his children. And still, they never called him anything but Everett. But now 4 boys slept under his roof, and one had tried to give him a name he thought he'd never earn. He didn't know what to do with that, but he knew enough not to break it. The next morning came quiet, full of gold light and the lowing of cattle. Everett rose before the sun, like always, but by the time he stepped onto the porch, the boys were already stirring. Lucas stood at the pump, working the handle while Finn poured water into a tin basin. Wes stood behind them, holding a towel, and Ben sat on the porch steps watching the chickens scratch at the earth, his small face thoughtful. "You boys ever learn to ride?" Everett asked. Lucas looked up, surprised. "A bit. Mama taught us on an old mule." "Well," Everett said, tugging on his gloves, "a mule ain't a horse, but it's a start." The barn came alive that morning. Everett brought out the gentlest mare first, a soft-eyed palomino named Lily. He saddled her slow, letting the boys watch every motion, where the cinch went, how the bit sat, how to check the hooves. One by one, he lifted them into the saddle, starting with Lucas, who sat proud though his legs barely reached the stirrups. Then Finn, grinning wide. Then Wes, silent but steady. And finally Ben, who clung to the horn with white-knuckled fingers until Everett walked beside him, hand firm on the reins, murmuring soft encouragements. They rode the fence line that day. Not far, just enough to feel the land under them, to learn how the ranch breathed. Everett didn't speak much, but he watched how Lucas scanned the hills like he was already guarding something. Watched how Finn counted fence posts out loud. Watched how Wes stayed close, always between the others and whatever shadow the trees threw. Watched how Ben glanced up at him every few minutes just to make sure he was still there. At night, he made beans and cornbread. The boys ate like wolves. Afterward, Lucas asked if they could sleep outside, just for a night. "Ain't seen stars like this since Mama passed," he said. Everett nodded. He helped them drag blankets onto the porch, gave them his own bedroll, and left the door open in case the night got too cold. Then he sat in his rocker again, staring at the sky with them until their breathing evened and the porch went quiet. He didn't sleep much after that. By the 5th day, the boys had settled into the ranch like seeds into soil. They knew where the tools went, how to check the water barrels, how to keep the smokehouse from getting too hot. Everett didn't have to ask anymore. Lucas and Wes just did what needed doing. Finn was forever chasing chickens. Ben followed Everett like a shadow. Still didn't say much, but he didn't need to. Then came the rider. It was near noon when Everett heard it. A single set of hooves, light but fast. He was mending a gate, shirt clinging to his back with sweat, when he turned and saw her. A girl on a paint horse, barely 16, sunburned and wild-eyed. She pulled up hard, dust kicking up around her like smoke. "You Everett Boone?" she asked, voice cracking. He stood slowly. "Who's asking?" She blinked hard, fighting back tears. "My name's Clara Finch. My brother, he's gone. Took the baby and left. Said something about the canyon. I've been looking for 2 days. Please, have you seen them?" Everett's gut went cold. He looked toward the porch. All 4 boys had frozen in the doorway. Clara followed his gaze. Her breath caught. "Lucas!" The oldest boy stepped forward. "Clara." The girl vaulted from her saddle. She ran like her legs might give out beneath her, and Lucas did the same. They met in the dirt, hugging so tight it looked like they might vanish into each other. The other boys ran too, all tangled together in a pile of arms and sobbing and laughter. Everett just watched. Later, once the dust settled and the boys had explained it all, how their uncle had tried to trade them for supplies, and how Lucas had waited until he passed out drunk to steal them away, Clara sat on the porch with Everett while the children napped. "They're not mine," she said quietly, "but I raised them just the same. Our folks died when I was 12. I did what I could. I thought I could keep them safe. But then Asa got bad. Mean. I didn't know what he was planning till they were gone." Everett listened. Didn't say a word. She looked at him then. "Thank you for keeping them alive." He shook his head. "They did most of the work." Clara smiled, sad and crooked. "Still, if you hadn't been there," she didn't finish. She didn't have to. That night, Clara slept inside. The boys curled against her like they'd never left. Everett watched from the rocker again, the quiet now filled with the faint sound of breathing of dreams settling like dust. He knew what came next. She'd take them home, or what passed for it, and the ranch would go quiet again. He couldn't sleep. Just before dawn, he saddled the mare and rode out into the hills. The stars were fading, the world holding its breath before the sun returned. He needed to feel the land, to remember what it had given and what it had taken. He didn't come back until the light was full. Clara was on the porch, eyes red. "We're leaving," she said softly. He nodded. "We'll go east. Find work. Maybe a town that don't ask too many questions. You'll need supplies." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "Just take what you need. You'll have a long ride." She nodded, swallowing hard. The boys loaded up in silence. Lucas wouldn't meet his eyes. Finn hugged him quick. Wes whispered a thank you. And Ben didn't move. He stood by the barn, wooden horse in hand, fists clenched. Everett knelt beside him. "It's all right, son." Ben shook his head. "She said we're going. But I don't wanna." Everett looked toward Clara. She was trying not to cry. "I know," he said gently. "But she's your kin. That matters." Ben hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a rock. Smooth, flat, the one shaped like a heart he'd found near the creek 2 days before. He pressed it into Everett's hand. "I'll come back," he whispered. "Promise." Everett didn't speak, just nodded once, sharp and firm. He watched them ride away, dust curling behind their horses. Watched until they vanished over the ridge. Then he turned back toward the ranch. The gate was still broken. The windmill needed greasing. The cattle still bawled in the distance. And the wooden horse sat on the porch rail, waiting. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. For 6 days, Everett Boone had grown used to the scuffle of small feet across the floorboards, to the muttered arguments about who got the bigger piece of cornbread, to the distant laughter of boys discovering that dirt could also be a playground. But now, only the creak of the windmill and the soft groan of the porch boards under his boots kept him company. The stillness that once comforted him now settled heavy on his shoulders like a wet coat. He didn't like it. Not anymore. He didn't move the wooden horse. Just left it where Ben had placed it, perched on the porch rail, its carved legs weathering slowly under the sun. Every morning Everett passed it, and every evening he paused beside it. He never touched it, but it was the first thing he saw when he stepped outside, and the last thing he looked at before going in. Like some kind of promise frozen in wood. Life returned to its old rhythm, but everything about it felt different. The cattle still needed feeding, the fences still sagged from time and weather, the tools still broke just when he needed them most. But he moved slower now, not from age, from weight. A kind of hollow ache he didn't have a name for. He caught himself listening, really listening, for the sound of boots on dirt that weren't his. But they never came, until the 7th night. The knock came just after dusk. Sharp, fast, urgent. Everett froze halfway through, buttoning his shirt. The last knock he'd answered had brought him 4 boys, caked in mud, and the memory of fatherhood he thought was buried. He walked to the door slow, boots solid on the planks. He opened it. Clara stood there, half collapsed against the frame. Her dress was torn, a cut above her eye bleeding sluggishly. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts, and her horse was nowhere in sight. "Clara, they took them," she gasped, grabbing his arm. "Everett, they took the boys." The world tilted. He steadied her, pulled her inside, sat her down before the fire. Her hand shook so badly she couldn't hold the tin cup he gave her. "Who?" he asked, voice low. She swallowed hard. 3 men. Rode into town last night. Asked about him. Elite. Told them the boys weren't mine. Said I was just escorting them. But they didn't believe me. Waited until I went to the store. When I came out, they were gone. All of them. Did they say anything? Only that they were taking back what belonged to them. Everett stared at the flames. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. Clara's voice cracked, softer now. Lucas tried to fight. He always does. Finn bit one of them. Wes just kept telling them to leave Ben alone. She paused, looked up, eyes red. Ben kept asking for you. Everett stood. He didn't speak again that night. He packed a saddlebag with dried meat, cartridges, a bedroll, and a coil of rope. Slid his rifle into its scabbard. When Clara reached for his arm, he paused only long enough to say, "You stay. Rest." I'll bring them back." Then he was gone. The trail was easy to pick up. Whoever the men were, they hadn't bothered to hide their tracks. Too sure of themselves. Too used to folks not following. But Everett had ridden after cattle rustlers in the dead of night and hunted wolves through snow so thick it muffled even breath. These men wouldn't be hard to catch. The only question was whether the boys would still be breathing when he did. He rode hard, stopping only to water the mare and examine the ground. Each hoof print, each broken branch, each disturbed bush told him a little more. They were heading southwest, toward the old river cut near Grady's Pass. No law out there. No people either. Just rock, sand, and caves worn into the hillsides like the mouths of sleeping beasts. By the second day, the sun burned hot enough to peel skin. Everett didn't stop. He rationed his water, chewed jerky he could barely swallow, and pressed on. He thought of Lucas, too brave for his own good, of Finn's freckled smile, of Wes's quiet strength, of Ben clinging to that wooden horse like it was the only thing tethering him to hope.
Late in the day, he found the first sign. A scrap of cloth. Blue. Torn and stuck to a mesquite branch, fluttering like a wounded bird. Everett dismounted, picked it free. He recognized it instantly, Lucas's shirt. The one Clara had stitched by hand. He folded it into his pocket and kept going. At dusk, he found their camp. 3 men. 1 fire. 4 bedrolls tossed in a rough semicircle, none for the boys. The children were tied, wrists and ankles, near a rock outcropping. Lucas sat upright, blood drying at the corner of his mouth. Wes lay on his side, too still. Finn was cradling his arm, which bent wrong at the elbow. And Ben was staring into the flames, expression blank. Everett didn't hesitate. He circled wide, using the rocks as cover, until he came up behind the largest of the men. The one with the scar across his neck. Everett didn't make a sound. Just slipped the loop of his rope around the man's throat and yanked. The man bucked, flailed, tried to scream, but Everett pulled tighter, dragging him backward into the brush. A few moments later, the body went still. He moved fast. Shot the second man before the third even knew what was happening. The bullet took him clean in the chest. The last one tried to run. Everett didn't give him the chance. When it was over, the fire still burned. The night was still hot. The only sound was the rustle of wind through the canyon. Everett cut the boys loose. Lucas grabbed his hand first, pressing it tight. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Finn clung to his waist, sobbing. "I was so scared." Wes didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around Everett's leg and didn't let go. But Ben stood apart. He looked up, his face streaked with tears and ash, and said only one thing. "I prayed you'd find us." Everett knelt, pulled him close. "You did good," he whispered, voice cracking. "You did real good." He made camp with them that night, keeping the boys close, his rifle never more than an arm's reach away. He dressed their wounds, fed them the last of his stores, and sat awake until the sky began to pale. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Not until they were home. The ride back was slower. Finn's arm needed splinting. Wes couldn't sit upright long. But they made it. Every hour, Everett glanced over his shoulder, counted heads. 1, 2, 3, 4. He didn't let them out of his sight. When the ranch came into view, Clara stood waiting, her hand shading her eyes. When she saw them, she dropped it and ran. Tears. Laughter. Apologies. Promises. All of it jumbled together like a storm breaking over dry land. Everett stood apart, as always. Watching. Until Ben let go of Clara's hand, walked over, and tugged on Everett's coat. "You comin' inside?" he asked, eyes wide. Everett hesitated. And then he nodded. He followed them in, boots trailing dust across the threshold. Into the house that had known only silence for too long. That night, Everett Boone didn't sit in the rocker. He sat at the table. Morning came like it had always come, quiet, gold light slanting through the shutters, the smell of earth and ash still clinging to the air, but for Everett Boone, it wasn't the same. Not anymore. Not after waking to the sound of 4 small voices breathing steady in the next room. Not after Ben had tugged his sleeve the night before and said, plain as a sunrise, "You're home now too." The house had never felt full before. Not even when Alice was still here, her laughter lingering down the hallway, her bread baking in the oven. That had been a different kind of life. A life built on the quiet lie that one day they'd hear little feet running across the floorboards, that the house would fill itself. When that lie cracked and spilled the truth into their bones, Alice had taken what was left of her hope and vanished down the road, leaving only her ring and the scent of lavender on the bedsheets. Everett had made peace with the emptiness. Or so he thought. But now, as he stepped into the kitchen and found Finn perched on a chair trying to fix the bent spoon with a rock, and Wes standing on a stool to check on the firebox, and Lucas murmuring instructions with a wounded kind of authority, and Ben curled up on the rug with the wooden horse tucked into his arm, he understood something he hadn't before. This house wasn't empty anymore. Clara moved easily among them, her hand brushing each shoulder as she passed, her voice steady. She didn't say much about what had happened. She didn't need to. The boys stuck to her like vines to a wall, but Everett noticed how their eyes always sought him out too. How Wes stayed in the doorway of whatever room Everett occupied. How Finn kept offering him little things, half a biscuit, a button he found, a knot he'd tied in a bit of string. How Lucas always listened a beat longer than the question needed, like he was measuring Everett's tone. And Ben? Ben barely left his side. "You look like a man who ain't used to being looked at," Clara said softly as they sat on the porch that evening, the boys asleep again, the wind shifting cooler now that autumn had begun to press at the edges of the land. Everett shrugged. "I've had a quiet life." She tilted her head. "Too quiet?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked out over the range. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, thin and lonely. "They asked if they could call this place home," Clara said suddenly. "All 4 of them. Said they didn't want to leave again. Not even to find town. Said this felt more like home than anywhere else ever did." Everett's jaw worked. "They don't say things like that easy," she continued. "But you knew that already." Still he didn't speak. Clara sighed, not annoyed but knowing. "You don't have to say yes, Everett. I'd understand. 4 boys is a lot. But I think maybe they already made the choice. You just haven't caught up to it yet." The next day, the work began again. The fences still leaned like old men with bad knees. The barn roof needed patching before the snow started to come in sideways. The cattle had wandered down toward the lower creek and needed driving back. There was no more room for hesitation, or silence, or slow thinking. The ranch had once been Everett's whole life. Now it was just one part of something larger. He gave each boy a task. Lucas helped mend the gate, learning how to hammer nails without splitting the boards. Wes cleaned the tack room, sorting old tools into neat piles without being asked. Finn and Ben gathered eggs, then fed the chickens, then climbed halfway up the hayloft pretending they were bandits on the run from the law. Clara baked bread for the first time in years, the smell pulling Everett inside the house like a fish caught on a line. After dinner, Everett passed around mugs of warm milk and small slices of honey bread. The boys sat cross-legged in front of the hearth, listening as the wind scratched softly at the windows. "Tell us a story," Finn said suddenly, crumbs still on his cheek. Everett raised an eyebrow. "What kind of story?" "A real one," Lucas said. "From before." Everett leaned back in his chair. He hadn't told stories in years. Didn't know if he remembered how. But the fire cracked and the boys waited, and he realized this was one of those moments that didn't come around again. He started slow. Told them about the time a storm rolled in so fast he had to tie himself to a tree just to stay upright. About the winter a bear broke into the barn and refused to leave, and how he'd shared half his rations with it just to keep the peace. About the horse he'd nearly lost to Quicksand, how he'd pulled it out inch by inch, just like he'd done with the boys. By the end, Ben was asleep against his leg, Finn half-dozing, Wes blinking slowly, Lucas trying hard not to smile. "I reckon I've got a few more in me," Everett said softly. The days passed like water through fingers. The boys settled deeper into the bones of the place, and Everett let them. He stopped guarding his silence like it was something sacred. He stopped pretending he didn't like the sound of boots thudding down the hall, or the sight of 4 bulls lined up on the table. He started keeping the back door unlocked. They rebuilt the chicken coop together after a fox broke in. Finn cried over the lost hen. Everett buried it himself. Ben brought him a flower he'd found near the river. "It's the only one still growin'," he said solemnly. "So don't let it die." Everett planted it in a rusted tin cup and set it on the windowsill. Lucas, quietly, began calling him Sir Les and Mr. Boone not at all. He just said Everett, soft and respectful, like a name learned from a prayer. But it was Wes who broke the quiet spell one evening while helping Everett saddle the mare. "You ever want kids?" he asked, sudden and sharp like a dropped knife. Everett didn't answer right away. "I did," he said at last. "Long time ago." "What changed?" "Life." Wes nodded like he understood. "Then, we ain't a skin to be yours. We just don't want to be nobodies again." Everett's throat closed. "You're not," he said. "Not what?" "Nobodies." The night came quiet and full of small sounds. The fire in the hearth. The soft rustle of pages as Finn tried to read aloud from a tattered book Clara found in the barn. The scrape of Lucas sharpening a stick to roast over the embers. Ben curled against Everett's side, eyes fluttering shut. The next morning, Everett found something on the porch. Another carving. Small. Rough. Shaped like the ranch house, with a little fence circling it. At the bottom, carved in blocky letters, one word, home. He held it for a long time. That evening, as the stars gathered overhead and the boys kicked up dust in the yard, Everett called out, "Lucas. Wes. Finn. Ben." They stopped. Turned. Faces expectant. He stepped forward. "I know I ain't what most folks think of when they hear the word father. I don't got much. Just this land. This house. These calloused hands. But if you boys want it, want this, then I reckon there's room enough for all of you." None of them said anything. Then Ben dropped the stick he was holding and ran full tilt into Everett's chest, hugging him like he was trying to keep the man from ever disappearing again. Lucas nodded. "We already decided." Wes smiled. Finn shouted, he said yes, and tackled his brothers to the dirt. Everett just stood there, one hand resting on Ben's back, eyes burning. He didn't say "I love you." He didn't say "welcome home." He didn't need to. He just watched them roll through the dust, laughing like they'd never known sorrow, and thought, this is what was missing. This was the peace the land had waited all these years to give back. Autumn came hard and fast to the high prairie, curling the leaves brown and pressing chill through the floorboards by dawn. The sky, once wide and unburdened, began to wear its clouds heavier. The first frost had already kissed the edges of the garden rows, and each morning Everett Boone awoke before the sun, hearing the hush of winter coming through the hills. But for the first time in years, he didn't face the cold alone. The ranch had become a living thing again, pulsing with rhythm and motion. Lucas woke earliest, slipping on his boots before the others stirred, gathering kindling and starting the fire before daylight breached the horizon. Wes followed after, quiet as ever, but always with purpose, always helping without needing to be told. Finn spoke to the chickens like they were old friends, and Ben still carried that wooden horse everywhere, though now it had a faded red ribbon tied around its neck that Clara had found in the bottom of her bag. Clara had taken to calling the boys her pack, and Everett couldn't disagree. They moved like they were stitched together now, bound not by blood but by something stronger. Trust. Shared pain. New roots. One afternoon, as the wind howled and clouds threatened rain, Everett found the boys digging in the old storage shed near the edge of the property. Lucas had unearthed a cracked slate board, and Wes was attempting to scratch letters into it with a nail. Finn sat on an upturned bucket, tongue poking from the side of his mouth, drawing a shaky horse that looked more like a goat. Ben, as usual, was digging a hole with both hands and humming. "What's this?" Everett asked, crossing his arms. Lucas looked up. "School." Everett raised a brow. "Don't recall hiring a teacher." Clara stepped into the doorway behind him, wiping flour from her hands. "You didn't," she said. "They hired me." Finn grinned. "We pay her in firewood and compliments." Clara rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in it. "They need to learn their letters, Everett. Town's too far, and schoolhouse teacher there says she won't take children without a man's name to sign for them." Ben stood up, mud on his chin. "You got a name, don't you?" Everett looked at them all. The way they stood there, half defiant, half hopeful. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You're right," he muttered. "Let me know if the teacher gives you trouble." He turned to leave. "Papa," Ben said softly behind him. "You spelled it with a P or an F?" Everett froze. The wind cracked against the walls, and the sky darkened like an old bruise. But warmth spread inside him anyway. "P," he said, not turning around. "Pretty sure." The storm hit hard that night, lightning stitching the sky with jagged scars and rain hammering the tin roof in relentless rhythm. The boys were jittery, pressing closer to one another, all eyes wide. Clara lit every lamp and pulled them in near the hearth, reading from an old Bible with pages so thin they whispered when turned. The words came gentle, spoken more for comfort than command. Everett sat in the rocker, oil lamp beside him, boots stretched out toward the fire. He didn't say much, just listened. But when the thunder cracked sharp overhead and Ben scrambled into his lap without a word, he didn't move the boy away. He just wrapped his arms around him and held on. 3 days later, a man rode into the ranch yard. Dust on his boots. Rifle across his saddle. A gray hat pulled low and the kind of face that had seen more cards than prayer. He didn't smile, didn't tip his brim. Just stared from the saddle like he was trying to size the place up in one long look. Everett stepped out onto the porch, shotgun held loose at his side. The man didn't blink. "Name's Ash Garner," he said. "I'm looking for 4 boys. Heard they were seen out this way." Everett didn't move. "You heard wrong." Ash narrowed his eyes. "One of 'em's mine." Clara appeared in the doorway, white-knuckled. "They're not yours," she said, voice tight. Ash turned in his saddle, letting the rifle hang in his grip. "Clara Finch. Thought you'd be halfway to Arkansas by now." "We were," she said. "Then they asked to come back." Ash smirked. "They're children. They don't get to choose." Everett stepped down off the porch. "They do here." Ash's hand slid near the butt of his gun. "You really want to test that?" Everett didn't flinch. "You really want to find out if I'm faster?" The air between them cracked with tension. The wind stilled. Even the chickens seemed to hush. Then, slowly, Ash's hand fell back to his thigh. "I'll be back," he said flatly. "With papers. With law. With men." Everett's voice was calm. "Then bring more than 3. Ash's jaw clenched. He turned his horse and rode off without another word. That night, Everett couldn't sleep. Neither could the boys. Lucas stood watch from the loft. Wes sharpened a stick into a point, over and over. Finn stared into the fire like it held secrets. Ben clung to Clara. Everett finally gathered them all close. "You scared?" Finn asked. Everett didn't lie. "Yes." "Good," Lucas muttered. "Means you're smart." Clara smiled faintly. We'll stay ready. However long it takes. They built up the barn wall the next morning. Reinforced the windows. Laid nails across the fence posts and gathered stones for the cellar. Everett trained them, not for blood, but for resilience. Lucas learned how to fire a rifle. Wes could load rounds faster than Everett expected. Finn built traps out of sticks and twine that might not stop a grown man, but would sure give him a limp. Ben practiced hiding, disappearing so well it took Clara 15 minutes to find him once. 3 days passed. Then 5. No riders. Then, on the 7th morning, just before dawn, Lucas shook Everett awake. They're here. 4 riders. No badges. No law. Just guns. They came slow. Confident. Thinking the ranch was soft. Everett met them at the gate. Ash sat his horse like a king returning to claim his land. I got claim now, he said, holding up a crumpled paper. County judge signed it. Everett didn't look at the paper. He looked at the man. You don't get to own people. Ash smiled. They're not people. They're cargo. That was all it took. The first shot rang out from the loft. Lucas, calm and steady, hit the man on Ash's left in the shoulder, sent him tumbling from the saddle. The others fired, chaos erupting like thunder. Clara hauled Ben into the cellar. Wes ducked low and flung a stone that cracked another man's eye. Finn screamed something and yanked the tripwire he'd strung near the corral, sent a spooked horse barreling straight into the third rider. Everett moved like lightning. 1 shot. 2. Then it was just Ash. Bleeding from the leg. Gun gone. Mouth curled in disbelief. Everett approached slow. I told you, he said. Ash spit blood. You'll hang for this. Everett shook his head. No. You came to steal children. They're not yours. They are now. Ash didn't get up. The sheriff came 2 days later, trailed by dust and questions. Everett showed him everything, the forged papers, the boy's statements, the bruises on Ben's arm, the quiet testimony Clara gave while shaking. When it was over, the sheriff just said, "Good thing you're fast, Boone." Everett said nothing. Just watched the man ride away. That night, Clara sat beside him. You could have killed him. I almost did. She nodded. They'll come again. Maybe not him. But someone. I know. She looked toward the porch, where 4 boys now played with sticks and twine and old horseshoes. Laughter spilled like water. But we'll be ready, she said. Everett said nothing. But in his hand, he held a carved piece of wood. The ranch house again. This time, with 5 little figures etched beneath it. The days after the shootout blurred into one long breath. Everett patched the fence again. Not from cattle this time, but from bullet holes and boot scuffs. The boys returned to their routines, though the shadow of what had happened lingered behind their eyes like smoke after a fire. Lucas walked taller now, but with a new weight on his shoulders. Finn kept to the barn more than usual, his smile still present but dimmer. Wes had become even quieter. When he spoke, it was only with purpose. And Ben, sweet Ben, didn't let Everett stray more than a few feet from him for days. Clara tried to make things feel normal again. She cooked warm meals that filled the house with cinnamon and butter. She laughed louder, told stories while scrubbing the boys' faces after they played in the mud. But Everett could see it, the way her hands sometimes trembled when she reached for the kettle. How she flinched when boots hit the porch too hard. They were all shaken. Just in different ways. The sheriff had done what he could. He took Ash Garner into town under armed escort, had his men search through the man's belongings, uncovered more than a few grim letters and worse, ledgers, names, lists of children. Garner had been part of something larger. A ring that scouted orphans, widows, and drifters too broken to be missed. Bought and sold. Moved like cattle. Everett wanted to ride out and burn the whole operation to the ground, but the sheriff had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Oni, we're working on it. One step at a time." So Everett did the only thing he could. He kept the boys close. On the 8th day, a letter arrived. The writer who brought it said it came from far west. Paper thin as air, envelope worn, addressed not to Everett but to Lucas. The boy took it with trembling fingers, retreated behind the barn to read it alone. It was a long time before he returned. When he did, his eyes were wet but his face calm. "That was from my aunt," he said softly, sitting beside Everett on the porch. "She used to live out past Salida. Says she only just heard about Ma. Said she's been looking for us." Everett nodded. "What'll you do?" Lucas looked out toward the fields, where Finn and Ben were racing each other through rows of hay and Wes sat sharpening a stick, patient and still. "She said we could come live with her," he said. "Says she's got a house with a well and a mule that don't bite. Said she'd take all of us if we wanted." Everett's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to expect their presence. The scuffling sounds at dawn. The scrape of spoons in chipped bowls. The loud, messy, beautiful chaos that now lived in every corner of his home. "Do you want to go?" he asked quietly. Lucas shrugged. "I don't know." Silence stretched between them. I think I finally know what it feels like to stay somewhere and not be scared," Lucas added. "I never felt that before. Not with Ma, not in town, not with any of the folks that passed us around after. But here?" He paused. Swallowed. "I ain't afraid here." Everett put a hand on the boy's shoulder. It wasn't a promise. Just an anchor. That night, they all sat by the fire again. Clara read aloud from a book that was mostly missing its middle pages. Finn begged for a story after. Wes started dozing before she finished. Ben fell asleep across Everett's lap, drooling on his leg. Lucas waited until everyone else was quiet. "I got a letter," he said, voice flat. The other boys looked up. "From Aunt Millie. Says we can come live with her. She's got a mule." Finn blinked. "A mule?" Lucas nodded. "And a barn. And she said she'd try real hard to be nice." Wes didn't speak, just stared at the floor. Ben sat up slowly. "Are we going?" "I don't think so," Lucas said. Then, after a beat, I wrote her back. Told her we found something better. Finn smiled. Wes let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Ben curled back into Everett's side without a word. The next morning, Everett rode into town for supplies. The general store was still dusty, the shelves half empty, but the clerk was a good man with a quiet way about him. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said as Everett stacked cans on the counter. "For more mouths to feed," Everett replied. "They eat like wolves." The clerk chuckled. "Heard what you did. With those boys. With that man. Folks talking about it like you're some kind of hero." "I ain't." "Well," the clerk said, tallying up the cost. "You might not think so. But they do." Everett paid and stepped outside. A woman waited near the post. 2 children beside her, faces dirty, eyes too wide. "You Everett Boone?" she asked. He nodded. "They said you take in children," she said. "Ones that got nowhere to go." He studied her for a long moment. The boy looked about 7. The girl maybe 9. Both stared at him like he might disappear. "I ain't got much," Everett said. "Just a house. Some work. Bit of land. That's more than we got." He nodded once. "Come on then." Clara was on the porch when he returned. She said nothing. Just helped the woman inside, handed the children bread, showed them the corner where the others had once slept. Lucas looked up from where he was whittling. "You gonna make us share our room?" "You ain't got a room," Everett said dryly. you got a barn and a pile of quilts. Lucas smirked. Guess we can fit more. That night, the house breathed a little deeper. Another pot on the stove. More boots by the door. More laughter. Everett sat on the porch long after the stars rose. Clara joined him eventually, mug in hand. You're building something, she said. I ain't building anything. She glanced sideways. You gave them a place. Gave me one too. He didn't answer. After a while, she said, there'll be more. You know that, right? Kids. Mamas. Folks with nothing but the clothes on their back. I know. You ready for that? He looked out over the land. The fields glinting silver in the moonlight. The barn standing solid against the dark. The windows glowing warm behind him. I wasn't ready for the first 4, he said. Didn't stop em from becoming mine. Clara smiled. They call you Papa now. All of em. He didn't respond. But he didn't deny it either. 3 days later, another knock came. Another child. Then 2 more a week after that. Each time, Everett answered. Each time, Clara found another space. Each time, the boys made room in their hearts. The house that once echoed with silence now swelled with sound. The range that once stretched empty now echoed with laughter and the stomp of small boots. They had built something. And no one, not Ash Garner, not the cold, not the ghosts of the past, was going to take it from them. Winter arrived not with a single snowfall but with the slow persistence of time itself, first the frost thickening across the window panes each morning, then the way the ground refused to thaw past noon, and finally, the deep silence that wrapped itself around the valley like a shroud. The sky turned the color of tin, the air thin and sharp enough to sting the lungs. But the Boone Ranch was no longer the kind of place that shivered in silence. It was alive now. Not loud, not wild, but full. The kind of full that warmed from the inside out. By the second week of December, there were 9 children living under the Boone roof, or at least half under the roof and the other half curled up in haylofts and corners, wherever Clara could stretch quilts and make warmth. There was no system at first. But slowly, structure formed itself around need. Lucas remained the quiet anchor, tall for his age now, lean with a steadiness that steadied others. Wes still didn't talk much, but the younger boys followed him like he was some kind of mountain they wanted to climb. Finn could build a rabbit trap out of 2 sticks and a button. And Ben, who still kept his wooden horse tucked under his pillow, had taken it upon himself to memorize every new name, every favorite food, every fear whispered in the dark. Clara taught when she could, reading from a torn almanac and an old psalter, sometimes making them copy the words into soot-scrawled slates. Everett repaired boots, chopped wood, and fixed a chimney pipe that hadn't drawn right since '87. He didn't say much during the lessons, but he always stayed near, one eye on the stove, the other on the boys. They were a strange family. No one would argue that. Some had parents still buried somewhere out there. Some had none at all. But when the wind howled through the valley and the fire cracked bright in the hearth, none of that mattered. Not here. Not anymore. But peace, like most good things, never lasts long in a land like this. It started with the letter. It came folded tight, sealed with wax, delivered by a lawman who didn't remove his hat even when he stepped inside the door. Clara read it first. Her lips tightened with every line, and when she handed it to Everett, her hands were shaking. To Everett Boone, owner of the property currently known as Boone Ranch, this letter serves as formal notice that your claim to land ownership has been challenged. Filed through the County Office of Records, said challenge is based on a previously undisclosed sale from 1869. Everett read it 3 times. They're trying to take it, Clara whispered. They found a loophole. The lawman cleared his throat. A Mr. Elias Dern, he said. Out of Silver Cross. Says he's kin to the original deed holder. Claims he's owed title now. Court date's been set in 2 weeks. Everett said nothing. Just folded the letter and set it on the mantel. 2 weeks. 14 days. To prove that the land his boots had bled into, the land that held the graves of cattle and dreams and all his memories, still belonged to him. And worse, if it didn't? They'd all be out. Clara stayed late by the fire that night. The children had gone quiet, sleep weighing their limbs, but she sat at the table with Everett, poring through the few documents he still had. "We don't have enough," she said finally. "No bill of sale. No proper title. You never registered it with the land office after Alice left," Everett said. "Yeah. I know you weren't thinking about paperwork. But now," Everett rubbed his face. "Dern's not coming for the land." Clara paused. "What do you mean?" "He's coming for what's on it." And that's when they realized this wasn't about acreage. Not really. It was about the story. About how word had spread further than anyone guessed. About how some drifter-turned-rancher had built a home out of orphans and strangers and made it stick. About how more and more children had begun showing up on his doorstep, guided by rumor, led by whispers, passed between hands that didn't want them anymore. And now, someone powerful had noticed. "I reckon Dern's thinking if he can take the land, he can scatter the rest." "We won't let that happen," Clara said, voice like steel. But Everett had seen too many winters to believe in simple endings. The days that followed were tense. Lucas took over the chores. Wes sharpened tools. Finn started mapping the property with old nails and string. Ben followed Everett everywhere, watching the man like he could hold the ranch together with nothing but his hands. And Everett tried. He visited the land office. Rode to the edge of the neighboring county. Dug through boxes in the attic so thick with dust they choked him. But there was no paper, no signature, no single item that could nail the claim down in a way a judge would trust. They needed a miracle. Or they needed Dern to make a mistake. And, in the end, it was Ben who caught it. He'd been playing under the floorboards again, crawling through the crawlspace with a candle stub and his usual disregard for rules. Clara had scolded him earlier, but he hadn't listened. And this time, he came crawling out holding something wrapped in oilskin, his face streaked with dirt. "What's that?" Clara asked. Ben shrugged. "Found it behind the beam. It was stuck real tight." It was a letter. No, several. Dated, signed, folded into a bundle. One from Everett's father, detailing the original land plot. One from the preacher who had married Everett and Alice, noting the land as part of their permanent dwelling. And one, oldest of all, signed in thick ink by a man named Silas Dern. Elias's great-grandfather, Clara breathed. "This is a waiver. It says he gave up all rights to this property in exchange for 30 head of cattle and a mule." Everett stared at it. "Where did this come from?" "I don't know," Ben said. "I just felt like I should look." Clara's eyes filled. "You saved us, Ben." Ben frowned. "Didn't know I was supposed to." But he smiled anyway. "They made copies. Delivered them to the sheriff, the clerk, the judge himself. 2 days before the hearing, Elias Dern came riding up with 2 men at his side. Just softly, half-forgotten hymns that rose and fell like the wind through pine. And then, without warning, Lucas spoke. "I used to think about the quicksand." The room stilled. Everett looked up from the whittling knife in his hand. Lucas stared into the fire. "Every night. That feeling. Of sinking. Of knowing nobody was coming." Wes shifted in his seat. Finn stopped shuffling cards. Ben crawled closer to Clara. Lucas swallowed. But someone did come. Everett didn't move. Just waited. "You didn't have to," Lucas added. "You didn't know us. We weren't your blood. We weren't your burden." Everett set the knife down. "No," he said. "You weren't." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice steady. "But you were mine the second I saw you sinking. Clara's breath caught. Lucas nodded once. Looked down at his hands. I think that's what makes a father, he said. Not who you lose. Not even who you protect. Just who you refuse to leave behind. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Ben, sleepy and half buried in Clara's shawl, murmured, "You're our papa." Everett reached for his coffee. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't respond right away. But when he looked up, the room had changed. They were all staring at him, not with fear or even with gratitude, but with the kind of trust that breaks a man open. He set the mug down and nodded. "All right," he said. "Then that makes you mine." The days that followed were quieter. The snow eased, but the wind still pressed cold against the windows each night. Everett fell into rhythm again, mornings spent hauling wood, afternoons mending tools or teaching the boys how to read trail signs or fire a rifle clean. Clara started writing letters for the children, sending word out into the territories in case any kin still wondered what became of the ones who vanished. Most times, no one answered. But once in a while, a reply came back. And each time, Everett would call the boy in question out to the porch, letter in hand, and wait. Some wanted to go see. Some didn't. Something worth fighting for. And no court, no thief, no storm, no shadow was ever going to take it away again. They weren't just survivors. Not just protectors. They were family. For good.